Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, the 4 GOP candidates for governor face off in a debate from Springfield. Then in about 50 minutes from now, we offer an encore presentation of our interview with State Senator Bill Brady, one of the 4 GOP gubernatorial candidates. Following that, in about 1 hour and 20 minutes, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz talks with Alderman John Arena of Chicago's 45th Ward. The two discuss the funding model for Chicago's public schools and whether Chicago's charter schools are pulling resources away from Chicago's public schools. And finally, in about 1 hour and 50 minutes from now, we talk with suburban Chicago superintendent and author of Fuel for Learning, Dr. Raymond Lauk. Dr. Lauk discusses how he's used the lessons he learned in corporate America to improve education and the learning process. That's all just ahead after this brief note.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Delitso Solomoyo, President of the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies. We are an organization of 36 member agencies located around Illinois which provide needed services to our fellow citizens. It may be helping provide services at a homeless shelter, or helping to provide affordable utilities to low-income people across Illinois through such programs as the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, better known as LIHEAP, or working with rural communities and helping them maintain needed community infrastructure. These are just a few of the many services provided by Illinois' community action agencies. But to provide these services efficiently and effectively, we need solid information. That's why, in addition to heading the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies, I am also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. I have watched the Illinois Channel for years. It provides serious coverage of the Illinois legislature, public policy discussions, and one-on-one interviews with leaders from across Illinois. It's the kind of solid, in-depth information all of us need to get beyond partisan politics and political spin and just hear directly what's happening, what's being proposed, and why. I know and you know that Illinois is filled with good people. But if we are to have good, effective public policies, we need to base those on good information. We get that from the Illinois Channel. That's why I watch it, and I hope you will too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, the 4 GOP candidates for governor face off in a debate from Springfield. Topics include pension reform, how to improve Illinois' business climate, and the future of government unions in Illinois. This runs about 50 minutes.
Good evening, and welcome to the Republican gubernatorial debate live from the Hoagland Center for the Arts in Springfield, Illinois. My name is Liz Foster, and I will be your moderator this evening. Tonight, we hope you take the next hour to listen to what the 4 men on this stage have to say about the issues that matter most to you. In addition to you at home, we have a live audience with us tonight. We ask that they refrain from applause until the end of tonight's debate. Tonight's format is very simple. Each question will be answered by all 4 candidates. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. At the end of questioning, each candidate will have a chance to address attacks, perceived falsehoods, or clarify earlier statements. Our rebuttal section offers each candidate roughly 1 minute to make their case. Then we'll end our debate with a 1-minute closing statement by each candidate. Now let's take a moment to introduce to you the 4 candidates vying for the Republican Party nomination for governor. We begin with State Senator Bill Brady from Bloomington. He's been a state senator since 2002, and before that a member of the Illinois House of Representatives. His running mate is Maria Rodriguez, the former village president of Long Grove. Also on the ballot is State Senator Kirk Dillard from Hinsdale. He's been a state senator since 1992. He's also the former chief of staff for former Governor Jim Edgar. His running mate is State Representative Jill Tracy. Our third candidate of the night is businessman Bruce Rauner from Winnetka. He's the chairman of R8 Capital Partners and former chairman of the Chicago Public Education Fund. His running mate is Wheaton City Councilwoman Evelyn Sanguinetti. Also vying for the Republican nomination is State Treasurer Dan Rutherford from Chenoa. He previously served in the Illinois Senate as an assistant minority leader and in the Illinois House of Representatives. His running mate is attorney Steve Kim from Northbrook. Now let's introduce our media panel, the ones who will be holding the candidates' feet to the fire. We have Vince Dementri from ABC News Channel, Bernie Schoenberg from the State Journal-Register, and Alex Stegman from WTAX Radio. Let the questions begin. Question number one comes from Vince Dementri. Vince.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'd like to begin with this, if I may. The state legislature may have inked a deal on pension reform, as you all know, but it is currently being challenged in the courts. It is tied up in the courts. Many of the lawsuits contend that it is unconstitutional. Should you become governor and a judge rules that indeed the current legislation that has passed, pension reform, is unconstitutional, what will you do as you begin from ground zero? And please, gentlemen, give us specifics. We'll begin with Dan Rutherford.
Great, I appreciate it. And let me start off by noting that I understand today is Bruce Rauner's birthday. So, Mr. Rauner, happy birthday. And I understand that we have verified that you are old enough to run for governor.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Well, let me start off in that the legislation that was presented, I do not believe is constitutional. So I am prepared when the time comes in January 2015 when I become the governor that it is something I'm going to have to deal with. And the important operatives in the conclusion to it is I believe that the solution needs to have consideration and needs to have acceptance. And those are the two things I don't think this bill had. The other thing is I understand that there's a great deal of a number of parties interested and involved in this, as they should be. What I intend to do as the governor is bring all interested parties to the table, whether it be the AFSCME union, the SEIU, the IEA, the IFT, and all of those, as well as the business groups, and put everything on the table. Everything from COLA to retirement age to health care, all of the things that are important to conclude and not negotiate this in the hot searing spotlight of the public. I think that's where a lot of negotiations come to fault, that you need to go into the room, you need to discuss it, you need to have a consensus, and before I sign it, it has to have consideration and acceptance.
Mr. Dillon. Thank you, Vince. You do what I've said for a couple of years I've done as governor. To lock everyone that's an interested party in the executive mansion, and you don't come out until it's done. Hopefully, if it's struck down, the court gives us some guidance of which to build off of. I noticed that Rhode Island, which has always been hailed as a model for pension reform nationally in the last few days, had an agreement where they got, it was litigation, and they brought everyone together. That's what you have to do, and you've got to do it. But you need to lock everyone in the mansion. No one comes out until there's an agreement, because the state does need major pension reform.
Mr. Brown.
Unfortunately, the pension bill that was passed was a significant failure. I think it was a Band-Aid on an open wound. We have a massive pension problem, and this pension bill did relatively little to fix it. And whether it's found constitutional or not, we need to do significantly more.
How would you fix it?
So the most important thing we can do is freeze the current system. Freeze it. Don't take away what was honestly accrued by government workers. Don't change what was accrued. But for future work, from this day forward, move current workers and future workers into a defined contribution plan, more of a 401k style plan. That would not save significant money the first 2 years, but over a 10-year period, 15, 20-year period, tens of billions of dollars. And then we could have that money, some portion of it, available to fund into the old pension liability and protect the workers who have one modest pension. I believe workers who have one modest pension should get that pension, and they shouldn't have that changed retroactively. We can and should, I believe, also go back in and change agreements or pensions that were unethical. We have folks who were spiked into the system. We have folks who've got 2 or 3 pensions. Some of that's legal, but most of it's not ethical. It's unfair to taxpayers and to honest government workers who have 1 modest pension. We should retroactively go and change those, and if we need a constitutional referendum to do so, I would advocate for that.
Okay. Mr. Brady.
Well, as the only individual on the stage who supported that pension reform, I believe it will be constitutional. And I particularly give Jill Tracy, Senator Dillard's running mate, applause for having the courage to vote for the most difficult piece of legislation ever put in front of the General Assembly, something that worked to protect the interest of our teachers and our state employees who worked for us and paid every dime in the system they were asked to. But governors and legislators and people who passed budgets failed to fund the system, so we had a $100 billion liability that we had to solve. It was unsustainable. We didn't want to be like Detroit, so we came up with a system. I firmly believe it will be constitutional. I applaud all the members of the General Assembly who took that courageous vote. If for some reason the Supreme Court decides it's unconstitutional, and we went to great lengths to make sure, my answer would be to look at what they said, but to, again, make sure we protect everything everybody's earned to date, alter the way we move forward. We probably then look at moving forward with a defined contribution program, as I've initiated in the past. But it's important for it to be constitutional that we live up to what everyone's earned. We did in this legislation was we were very careful to do that. We just altered the rate of growth, making it sustainable so it won't be Detroit-like.
My question now, and it goes first to Senator Dillard, who I hope will excuse me for using the name of another candidate in the question. One of your fellow candidates, Mr. Rauner, said when he visited the Brandt Agricultural Services Company in Springfield in June that Franklin Delano Roosevelt thought government unions shouldn't exist and are immoral. Others have interpreted Roosevelt's comments differently, but with the issue raised, do you think government unions are immoral? And if you had your way, what percentage of state workers, teachers, firefighters, and police in Illinois should be represented by unions 5 years from now?
I don't believe unions are inherently bad, and I accepted the endorsement of a major union on Friday. I think many people in this room know Cinda Klickner, who is an English teacher from here in Springfield. I don't think she is a union boss. She's an English teacher that teaches our children. So unions are not inherently bad. They are many, many members of our families and our communities. Obviously, I think state government has become incredibly unionized. You do have to have some merit employees that are not members of a union. But I believe in the right to collectively bargain. Illinois is not Indiana. We're not Wisconsin. We are a state that has a proud organized labor history. I will tell you, though, that the best way to get concessions from unions and to keep them from killing the goose that laid the golden egg is to meet with them, to talk to them. It's not to demonize them. I was the sponsor of the work rule changes that kept McCormick Place, some very difficult unions we had to deal with. We did it in a bipartisan way with President Cullerton, Senator Radonio, our leader, as well as Speaker Madigan. And I also voted for and was instrumental in work rule changes for public transit drivers in the state.
Mr. Rauner.
Yep, Bernie, this is one of the most important issues we face as a state today. Franklin Roosevelt, when he spoke of unions, he emphasized the fact that President Roosevelt, he was very pro-union. President Roosevelt was very pro-union, but he was troubled deeply by government unions. There's a big difference between a government union boss and private sector unions. Private sector unions need to compete in the marketplace, in the workplace, and businesses negotiate back and can move, and they're flexible. In government, there's no flexibility. Schools are located where they are. Government is one bureaucracy, doesn't move. Springfield's not moving. And it's when a government union boss has power with taxpayer-funded union dues to influence politicians through campaign cash, campaign workers that are free but actually paid for by government taxpayers inside the government. It's a conflict of interest and it's a corrupting influence. And the result of it is spending goes up, taxes go up, and businesses leave our state in the communities where that spending is too high. And as a result, working families, Many union families, as well as non-union families, working class families are suffering. They suffer as a result. Jobs leave, taxes rise, school reform doesn't happen, and working families, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, truck drivers, maintenance workers, they suffer in the private sector because of the power of the government unions.
If I may quickly follow up, you didn't say if there should be fewer in 5 years. Should they go away if it's an immoral system?
I believe that their power needs to be restricted. I'm not against the existence of government unions, but workers should be free to choose whether to be in a union or not.
We go to Senator Brady.
Well, Bernie, I think the word you used or quoted Mr. Rauner saying that they're immoral. They're not immoral. I mean, unions serve their constituency, the people that they represent. And certainly public and private sector unions have done a lot to assist in enhancing the quality of life of the members that they provide for. They also provide for a skilled workforce. We can't lose sight of the fact that union representation often provides in the private and the public sector with a skilled workforce that's able to meet the demands of a government job. So I think it's abusive to use the word immoral when you talk about any union members. They've been a pillar of our country, and they've been important to us. But it is important that a governor have balance. And I will say this about Governor Quinn. He has failed at developing a relationship with the unions. We do have far too many, as a percentage, union employees because we've seen many of them choose a union job that was protected rather than a management job before, because this administration has failed to budgetarily deal with that. As governor, I'm going to work with the unions to make sure that there are union jobs, but I also think we need more of a balance to where management jobs are not needed to be unionized and can work under the flow of what we do in government. So as governor, I'm going to be honest with the unions. I'm going to negotiate fair and decent contracts. We're going to meet our obligations. We're not going to make promises of raises like Governor Quinn and then fail to deliver on them. And we're going to deliver respect.
Thank you. And Treasurer Ruth.
Great. I happen to believe in the right to collectively bargain, both in the private sector and in the public sector. I mean, we talk about working families, and I too concur that to suggest the public employee unions or their leadership, our bosses, and immoral is inappropriate. I do believe, though, that we need to have a good balance. I understand the point of your question, what is the percentage in 5 years? Candidly, I can't give you that, and I'm just being honest with you. There are positions within our government that I do believe should have the opportunity to be collectively bargained. But I absolutely believe that there are positions in our government that should not be. And we've gone through a legislative initiative this past year into which the constitutional officers, and I've been a part of that, suggest that there are positions that should not fall under a union, that they should be discretionary, they should be at will, and go with what the constitutional is. So the balance in itself is yet to be seen.
Gentlemen, good evening. For the next question, we'll begin with you, Mr. Rauner, and we'll continue on down the line. Illinois has been maligned for a perceived poor business climate. Governors from other states are running ads trying to convince businesses to leave. Major businesses are threatening to leave without incentives. But recently, we saw ADM stay in Illinois without incentives. Chicago's tech startup scene is flourishing, and the state's in the middle of the pack, really, when it comes to corporate taxes. So my question is the business climate in the state getting better? And if not, what do you plan to do as governor specifically to make sure that it gets better?
Alex, we have one of the most hostile business climates of any state in America. And we have the highest unemployment rate in the Midwest. As a result, we have one of the highest unemployment rates of any state in the nation. We are hostile to business. One of the biggest surprises of the campaign trail for me is how many more companies are leaving the state than I even realized before I started campaigning a year ago. It's a deep problem. On lists of how CEOs and business owners rank Illinois, they rank Illinois towards the bottom. And it's outrageous. There's no good reason for it. We have great people. We have great location. We're the capital of the Midwest. We have great infrastructure, or we're letting it deteriorate. We should be kicking the tails of all the states around us, and instead they have lower unemployment rates than us. We have worse unemployment than Michigan. I mean, good grief. It's unacceptable. We need to reduce the regulatory burden on business primarily, but also the tax burden. Many business owners are sub-S corporations. They pay the personal income tax. And that's been raised, and they're talking about raising it more. That would be devastating to business. But we also have very high sales tax, use fees, and real estate taxes, and that hurts business owners. But we also need to reduce the regulatory burden. Workers' comp, tort system, litigation system, insurance costs, environmental restrictions, labor regulations. We are a regulation-heavy, restrictive, heavy bureaucracy state. We need to become pro-free enterprise, pro-growth again, so we are stealing businesses back from Indiana rather than the other way around.
Mr. Brady.
We're absolutely right. There's nothing more important to the state than improving our economy and bringing the 200,000 jobs back we've lost over the last 5.5 years, which really means we need to work toward instill consumer and business confidence back in Illinois. Now, I would say pension reform was one of the first steps. It was important. We saved $180 billion in that proposal that will work to save taxpayers money and solidify the pensions for teachers and state employees, which was the first step, which was important. But the next step is absolutely got to be to deliver on the tax cuts that the Democrats promised. As Republicans, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that those tax increases the Democrats placed on families and businesses are lowered and reduced with the cuts that are scheduled to take, and I adamantly support that. No way, no how will we allow the Democrats to extend that. But they also need other specifics. In the area of workers' comp, they need causation, like other states, to reduce the cost, protecting injured workers, but making sure the premiums are fair. They need an educated workforce, which is why I call for abolishing the State Board of Education, ending the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. and Springfield, empowering local school districts, parents and school board members and teachers to teach to the interest of the student, not some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C.'s idea of a test. We can make this the greatest state in the nation, but we have to do it by building consumer confidence. Once we build consumer confidence, the businesses will reinvest and take advantage of all the wonderful assets we have, starting with our great workforce and our people.
Mr. Rutherford.
Great. Well, let me start off that I've been 25 years in the private sector. I've been honored to be a citizen legislator, but I've served in the private sector with a Fortune 100 company that deals with small companies and large companies. So I come from an understanding like that. The other is a comment you made in regards to incentives. My contention is I want all these marquee companies to stay here in the state of Illinois, but we don't need to have special legislation drafted for just one company. If you're going to change the law because it's good for one company, change the law so it's all applicable for those of that same type of a company. Number three in this, we got to stop this negative attitude. Everybody's talking about how bad Illinois is. This is a great state. We've got so many things to offer. And let me tell you what I'll do as governor. Number one, I will be appointing directors of state agencies, boards and commissions, that their chief priority is to do their job within their agency, natural resources, aging, revenue, whatever it may be. But they will be responsible to me to help create a job and retain a job, not be the barrier to a job. Number two, my Lieutenant Governor, Steve Kim, will be in charge of the Governor's Office of Job Creation and Retention. So when you get that bureaucrat out there that's making it abundantly difficult for that small business particularly to operate here, that will be the place for the ombudsman, the portal to come into the system. And number three, I'm going to be the chief marketing officer. So when Chris Christie comes flying in and Rick Perry comes parachuting in from Texas, I'm going to be the guy that's the chief marketing officer and sell Illinois.
Mr. Dillard.
Alex, two national surveys recently said Illinois' outlook for 2014 is dead last, 50th in America. I look forward to an Illinois when we don't have to incent or bribe anybody to come to Illinois to do business. We have the best natural resources. We are the capital of the Midwest, and we must get back our competitive advantage around the Midwest from our neighboring states. Along that line, my vision of the state is to make us a destination economy for people that create jobs. We are overtaxed, and we are greatly overregulated. My Lieutenant Governor candidate, who is here today, Jill Tracy from Quincy, her family started out of the back of a station wagon, and today they employ 2,000 individuals in the state of Illinois, 4,000 nationally. Jill Tracy and her Dot Foods business in agriculture, redistribution business, knows what it's like every day to have to compete against Missouri or Indiana or the rest of the 50 states, and she's going to have another title. In addition to being the Lieutenant Governor, she's going to be known as the Repealer, and she's going to travel this state meeting with families and farmers and businesses, small and large, and saying what regulations stifle economic development of your business in the state of Illinois. So I look forward to the day we don't have to incent anybody to be here. I'm the sponsor of the Boeing legislation that brought them to Chicago and Navistar from Fort Wayne, Indiana to my district, but we always have to remember that small businesses need to also have the kinds of incentives that the big guys get.
My turn, and I'm not sure that they're exactly skeletons, but I do have something for each of you individually. Senator Brady, first. I'm aware that you want to focus on fiscal issues in this race, but political reality is that social issues are also weighed by voters. Your personal views have been that local school districts should be able to decide if they teach only evolution or also intelligent design, and that abortion should not be allowed in cases of rape or incest. In a state that has been trending Democratic, how can you assure Republican primary voters that you could win in November with those views?
Well, Bernie, I came a few thousand votes short. Went from 150,000 votes in a Republican primary to nearly 1.8 million, and there was a third-party rogue candidate in the race. So in a Democratic state that's 40% Democrat, we came pretty close. But I'll tell you, the rematch against Pat Quinn and myself will be a fun one, because I promise you, as I travel around the state, there's a great deal of buyer's remorse out there about the false promises Pat Quinn made in that election, and I'm the only candidate in the stage who can re-energize that debate and go on to win. You bring up some social issues and some things that you think are important, and I confess to you they are, but I do believe, I reaffirm, I believe that school boards should be allowed to teach what they want to teach, to meet the curriculum interest of their students. And when it comes to the issue of abortion, I am pro-life. I have a 100% pro-life voting record, and I'm proud of it. But I do also realize that there's something called the U.S. Constitution. And in spite of Pat Quinn's desire to run attack ads against Bill Brady and claim he'd eliminate a woman's right to choose in the case of rape and incest, those were attack ads that were distorting the truth. No governor in this country can eliminate a woman's right to choose. But I'm not going to back away from my pro-life beliefs. I believe government has an obligation to protect innocent human life. And I believe that as a Republican, you have to be both socially and fiscally conservative to build your base to go on and win. I think I proved that, particularly as we relate to last several gubernatorial elections and presidential elections in this state.
Thank you. Treasurer Rutherford, I know you have strongly denied allegations made against you in a lawsuit from a former employee who alleged pressure to do political work and sexual harassment, but you also talked about the outside investigation you ordered up at taxpayer expense to clear your name. Now you say you can't release it on advice of legal counsel. Shouldn't voters get to see that report now before the primary? And if they don't, aren't you asking them to cast ballots without adequate knowledge about you?
I would very much.
There you go.
I would very much like for them to see it. In fact, when I made the announcement that we're going to release it, that was totally the intent. What happened before the date of the release and the time was the fact that there was a federal lawsuit filed. Right now, advice of counsel is because there's a federal lawsuit going on. I'm working it through. I want to get that out there, believe me.
You also have said that Mr. Rauner is behind this. Do you have any proof at this point?
I do not have direct proof to that.
Thank you. Senator Dillard. At a rally in October at the State House Rotunda, you said, and I quote, "Defining marriage between one man and one woman to protect children and our families is something that the legislature has a duty to do. Do you think the state has been harmed by passage of the bill that will allow same-sex marriage, and will you do anything to modify or reverse that law?"
Well, only time will tell. I have no plans to modify that law. I am laser focused, Bernie, on my plan to make us a destination economy for job creation, and hopefully we'll get to our plans on how we make the state of Illinois itself fiscally responsible and have a balanced budget again.
Mr. Rauner, it was very clear in a series of interviews you did last month that you spoke to then Chicago Public Schools CEO Arnie Duncan at least about the process of getting your daughter on a special principals list so she could attend the prestigious Walter College Peyton Prep High School in 2008. In fact, you told Channel 2 in Chicago that, quote, "There's nothing wrong with it and I would do it again and again." But when I asked you in a September 3rd interview, and I quote, "Did you talk to Mr. Duncan about it?" you said, quote, "I did not." And when I asked if you might have left him a message, you kind of laughed and said, "I told you the facts." It seems like your story changed. Why?
Yes, I think I apologize. I might have misunderstood your question. Arnie Duncan and I would talk regularly because I'm very involved and have been for 25 years in school reform in Chicago. Very involved in charter schools, voucher school choice, so I talk to Arnie regularly. I don't really recall much of the conversation that my wife and I had around the time of our daughter's application to Walter Peyton College Prep. The important issue is we did not ask for any special favors, special treatment, special deal for our daughter. Our daughter applied. There are 3 criteria to go to magnet schools: grades, test scores, and attendance. She had straight A's, perfect entrance exam, but she had pneumonia in middle school, and as a result wasn't admitted on the standard process. There is a process for specific criteria open. 5% of applicants can come in under a deferential process. We called and had her put on that list. Not asking for anything special. Hundreds of other families did the same thing. And she was immediately accepted because she's such a superstar student.
You also in June talked to Carol Marine of Channel 11 in Chicago, and she asked, did you talk to Arnie Duncan? And you said no, which again seems to conflict with what you told the other stations later.
Yeah, no, well, that's fair. I mean, frankly, my wife and I, we have some disagreement about who talked to who when. I don't really recall. I talk to Arnie all the time. I don't really recall talking to him about this much. The reality is, neither my wife or I asked for special favors. And our daughter was very excited and honored to go to that school. And the fact of we want school choice for every parent. We worked hard in Chicago to do it. Didn't ask for any special favors for us.
Gentlemen, as you well know, over the years, downstate Illinois has seen a mass exodus of state jobs moving from Springfield to Chicago. Under your administration, what would the workforce look like? Would you attempt to move some of that exodus back to Springfield? Because people here in downstate, as you well know, are very proud that this is the state capital and not Chicago. Would you look to be moving those jobs back here? Mr. Rutherford.
I'm first, great. Well, let me just give you a testimony. I'm the Treasurer of the State of Illinois. I'm the only constitutional officer standing up here. And the answer is yes. Now, to be fair to Chicago, you know, it's an important part of the state of Illinois, and we need to be fair to Chicago. But by testimony, right now, my chief of staff is based here in Springfield. My deputy chief of staff is here in Springfield. My other deputy chief of staff is here in Springfield. My director of legislative affairs is here. My director of unclaimed property. My director of college savings. In fact, I got to think about it. I think I have one director in Chicago. So this is not being biased downstate or upstate. I happen to understand where the seat of government is and where the operations of government is, and I intend to operate that way.
Mr. Dillard.
Springfield's the capital of Illinois, not Chicago. And we must have the workforce be here in Springfield. This is where it belongs. When I've lived in Springfield as a staff member down here for the governors that I've worked for. I was married right up the road in Elkhart in Logan County in a small farming community. And the workforce must be in Springfield. This is where your systems are. As Governor Edgar's chief of staff, we required our cabinet to live in Springfield because this is where you govern from. Governor, if you want to be the governor of Illinois, you need to live in the governor's residence here. If you want to be the CEO of General Motors, you got to live in Detroit. You got to be here. You got to be here to be 5 minutes away from a legislature that every now and then, in fact more than every now and then, needs pulling back in. So yes, Vince, the workforce has to be moved back here. When I go downtown Springfield and remember what it used to be like, there are thousands of fewer people there every day, and the workforce needs to be in Springfield, and government operates more efficiently when the government is here in Springfield.
Mr. Rauner, do you agree with the stance of your foes here, Mr. Dillard and Mr. Rutherford?
The issue boils down to cost and productivity. Cost and productivity. We have got to bring down the cost of government, drive up the productivity of the workers inside the government. That is essential. Our tax burden is too high. Our spending is too high. We've got to bring that down. I'm going to transform our state government. I want to see it run more like a business. And we'll do that throughout the state, wherever the productivity and the cost saving can be the most significant. My role model for this is Mitch Daniels. When he became governor of Indiana, he brought in 30 superstars from the private sector, from the business sector, and he brought them to the state capitol and said, let's drive up the productivity, shrink the spending, and transform our state government. He did a fantastic job. We need to do the same thing here.
But if I could interrupt you, I'm not sure I'm getting an answer as to whether you would move those jobs, or at least try to move some of these jobs back to Springfield from Chicago.
Because we have to look at, and I can't sit here today and say where will the cost be lowest, where will the productivity be the highest. I'm guessing that Springfield might be lower cost cost, higher productivity than Chicago? I think that's a reasonable guess. I don't know today. We'll find out very quickly once we have an administration in place. I personally, my wife and I are going to move to Springfield. I'm excited to do it. It'd be an honor to live in the governor's residence in Springfield. I love Springfield. It's a beautiful community. It's a great part of the state. I'm looking forward to living here. And the government, this is the seat of government. Much government activity should be here. But it's all about driving down the spending, making our government productive and efficient. That's what will drive our decisions.
Okay. Mr. Brady.
Well, I don't have to guess, Vince. I know that we need to move more jobs back from Chicago to Springfield. This is the seat of state government. I know it's more efficient and effective to do it. We've seen it in better years. So absolutely, we need to do that. And as governor, I will live and work here because this is where the work will be done. We need a governor who's going to move his family here. Nancy and I will move and live here in the governor's mansion because that's where you do the job. But we've seen far too much of Chicago politicians attacking downstate Illinois. And if I might use some of my time to talk about one incident, we see not only the exodus of state government jobs from Springfield to Chicago, but we've seen the lack of empathy for private sector jobs. And just to give you one example, last session we passed a bill that not only would have kept ADM's corporate headquarters in Illinois, in Chicago, but would have rebuilt another 100 jobs per year. Now, when it came to Allstate and when it came to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, we were there willing to help the Chicago politicians in their area because it was a win-win. But when it came to Decatur, Illinois, Macon County, what happened? Governor Quinn turned a deaf ear. We need a governor who can represent all of Illinois. I'm tired of all the control coming from the Chicago metropolitan area. As a resident and a native of Bloomington, Illinois, I understand that there's more value to this state than just Chicago. I want Chicago to be a great state, but I want the rest of Illinois to thrive and prosper equally, and as governor, I'll deliver on that.
Senator Dillard, I'll start with you for this next question. Illinois' temporary personal and corporate income tax increases will expire a few months from now. As the Senate President put it this week, that's about $1.6 billion in revenue that we're going to be losing. Where specifically does that lost revenue come from?
Well, first of all, I didn't vote for the Democrats' 67% increase in the state income tax. Senator Cullerton, the Senate President, and his colleagues promised us, they promised the people of Illinois that they would make this tax temporary and they would use it to pay off our old bills. So, you know, it's up to Senator Cullerton and his colleagues to live up to their commitment to the people of this state to make that tax temporary. I would make it up in primarily two places. The first is you've got to grow your economy. Alex, and I told you we rate 50th in economic outlook in a couple of national surveys. You know, we must make us the capital of the Midwest and competitive again. So you've got to grow your economy. That's the best way if you believe, and I believe Illinois has a spending problem, not a revenue problem, but the best way to put more money in the state treasury is for creating private sector good paying jobs. But I've got a laser focus in on Medicaid. Medicaid's our state's largest expenditure. I've managed that system before, once for a gubernatorial administration. It needs to be innovative. We spend more on Medicaid, Alex, than we do on education, and that's not my priority, but there are billions of dollars of savings that I believe we can get from Medicaid. You've got to take people who are ineligible to be on Medicaid, and there are tens of thousands of those people that Governor Quinn and his administration will not get off those rolls to save money and provide better care to those who truly need it.
Mr. Rauner, how do we potentially offset a $1.6 billion shortfall?
We have to bring down the overall spending dramatically. That's primarily pension reform, true significant pension reform. That's significant Medicaid restructuring and reform. It's also government operations restructuring and reform. Our government is bloated, it's bureaucratic, it's high cost, very little use of technology in our government. We need to transform our government operations.
And these are all things that will bring down the immediate problem that the Senate President points out is, $1.6 billion as this expires immediately.
Well, the one thing, politicians like to get caught up in a particular issue that is conducive to their point of view. President Cullerton is advocating progressive income taxes and trying to make the case that we need to go to that. We do not. It would be damaging to the economy. Politicians spin things for their own benefit. We need to reduce the spending dramatically. And if it takes us a couple years to do it, that shouldn't dissuade us, and we shouldn't worry about a $1.6 billion one-year problem. We've got to take the tough decisions that benefit us for the long term. One of the priorities I will do is not only bring down the state-level spending, I want to form a task force, a commission focused on reducing government cost and waste in the state of Illinois. I'll bring together county chairmen, mayors, city managers, and school superintendents who are focused on productivity and lowering costs. Because our government cost problems, our tax problems, aren't only at the state level. They are throughout the layers of government we have. We need to reduce the number of layers. We need to drive down the cost and up the productivity. And I want a comprehensive statewide solution.
Senator Brady.
Well, there's probably nothing more important right now than delivering on that tax cut. Every candidate's got to make their decisions, but I'm the only candidate who's consistently said no way, no how will we let the Democrats increase taxes in Illinois, and I will deliver on that tax cut. Why? Because it's the only way we're going to rebuild our economy. The Democrats took 1 week's pay out of the pockets of every working family in the state of Illinois. They took money away from small businesses that wanted to reinvest in capital. If we're going to rebuild our economy, we've got to build enthusiasm and confidence in the business side, and to do that, we've got to deliver on this tax cut. In fact, I want to go further. I've outlined a plan to further reduce the personal income tax in Illinois with a goal of actually eliminating it, like states like Texas and Florida, who are tops in all barometers, tops in employment, tops in fiscal responsibility, tops in job growth. But how you do it starts with also fiscal responsibility, which is why it was so imperative that we passed pension reform. We couldn't wait for this. We needed the reform. The reform will provide over $1.3 billion in first-year savings. That helps offset those increases. Natural revenue growth will help us as well, and there are other areas of state government where we can work on reforming. Medicaid is one of the biggest areas that we have. But natural revenue growth is estimated to be over $900 million in revenue. That pension reform, $1.3 billion. That offsets it, but we can't stop there. We've got to make sure that every dollar the taxpayers give us to spend is redefined and reprioritized so that we're spending it for the best interests of the people of Illinois.
And Treasurer Rutherford.
Great, thank you. You know, what I decided both as state senator, as a state treasurer, now a candidate for governor, is that I'm not going to pander and I'm not going to throw bombshells for political reasons. I did not oppose Governor Quinn's desire to move back his budget address. He's a constitutional officer, and some are saying it's political, it's because of the primary. Well, you know, I'm a constitutional officer. I've had to put together a budget. I understand. I didn't oppose that. If he needs a little more time, I'm okay with that. Also, up front, I don't want this income tax increase to stay. I don't want it to stay. But I don't know what's going to happen between now and January when I take that oath of office. I don't think the pension bill will be constitutional. What are they going to do between this next session in regards to borrowing and spending? There may be, you know, let's be honest, there may need to be some form of revenue on the table for a negotiation. I've called for long-range strategic planning for our state assets, our prisons, our centers for developmental disabilities, and for veterans. But what I can also tell you is everything will be on the table. Everything's going to be on the table. And I don't particularly think that what Senator Cullerton has just done to try to pander, politicize, and go out there and grandstand about this issue because we have ourselves a gubernatorial race. You've got to take this out of the hot series spotlight and sit down, put everything on the table, and negotiate what's best for the long term of the state of Illinois.
Gentlemen, that wraps up our media panel segment of the debate. Up next, we allow these men to clear the air, address any perceived falsehoods, or clarify earlier statements. Will the gloves come off? We'll find out when we return.
Right now, we'd like to give all of our candidates a bit of a rebuttal time. We'd like to take the time to allow the candidates vying for the mansion here in Springfield, the governor's mansion, to kind of clear the air and find out if there was anything said tonight that they'd like to expand upon, or anything said by other the candidates that they took exception to. So you will have 45 seconds, gentlemen. So we appreciate it if you can make it concise, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Brady.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just say that it's an honor to be here tonight. I'm running for governor because I believe in Illinois. I believe this state has the richest heritage and the richest opportunity of any state in the nation. And I want to take my Central Illinois business experience, coupled with my legislative experience, to work with the legislature to forward meaningful programs that move our state forward. I've outlined an agenda. I've said no to Democratic tax increases and yes to tax cuts for families and businesses. I said we're going to balance the budget. We're going to have education reform. We're going to have term limits to restore government to the people of Illinois. Those are the policies, the bold initiatives that we need in this state. And as your governor, that's what I'm going to deliver on.
Mr. Dillard, you're on the clock.
Thank you. I think this is our clarification round, is it not?
It is.
You know, Bernie, in answer to your question about Mr. Brady's position on social issues, the demise of his campaign began with an idea that he had to mass euthanize animals. That began the drumbeat that made him a vulnerable candidate. And it was also followed up with stories, and there was another one on the front page of the Chicago Tribune last week, where Bill votes on legislation before the General Assembly that impacts his family's real estate business. I'll give Mr. Rauner a pass tonight on pay-to-play. I won't gig him about Stuart Levine being paid $1 million, the mastermind of the Blagojevich corruption ring, and he getting $50 million back from a board that Mr. Levine sat on. You touched on him clouding his kid into the Walter Payton High School in Chicago, and I won't even mention how he gave $300,000 to the Democrat governor of Pennsylvania and then had business increase from public pension funds in Pennsylvania to his firm.
Mr. Rauner, salvo's been fired.
I like all those things that weren't mentioned. That's pretty that's impressive. So, Bernie, I'd like to address your comment, and I apologize to you for being incorrect. Frankly, my memory is not clear, and I honestly thought that I had never talked to Arnie because it was a minor issue, our daughter's application process, which I wasn't involved with. My wife corrected me, said, Bruce, you talked to Arnie. I said, I thought you talked to Arnie. Okay, I don't remember. The fact is, it was a minor issue because we didn't ask for any special favors. We just got her name on the list. And I spent a lot of time, and this is an important issue, with school reform in Chicago. Vouchers, charter schools, merit pay, modification of tenure, and really empowering parents. My wife and I are dedicated to that. We've spent years and much of our financial resource trying to empower parents in Chicago for school choice, and we're passionate about it.
Mr. Rutherford.
You know, I don't think there's anything I need to clarify, but there's something I'd like to highlight even further. When you asked the question earlier about Chicago and Springfield, you know, it is very obvious. I mean, you don't have to be an economist to understand that building space, office space between the city of Chicago and Springfield is dramatically different in price. That is in part why I see the majority of my staff, the vast majority of my staff on the Treasurer's office, and for that matter should be for government, right here in the capital city. You even take things like parking spaces. What you have to pay for a parking space for fleet cars and staff cars in the city of Chicago compared to Springfield is dramatically different. And to be candid, too, salaries and the cost of living, it is dramatically different. It makes abundant economic sense to have this staffing here at the state capitol.
Gentlemen, we would like to thank you for coming to Springfield, the capital city, the home of Illinois state government, and engaging in this spirited debate. When we return, we'll wrap things up and give the candidates the final word. Stay with us. 4 men are vying for the chance to represent the Republican Party in the race for governor in the November election. But in order to move on to November, they need your vote in March. Tonight, we've heard about the issues that matter to you: jobs, the economy, pensions. At this time, we'll give each of our candidates 1 minute for a closing remark and to sway your vote. We'll begin with Dan Rutherford. Your closing statement, please.
Great. Thank you very much for hosting this tonight. I've been 25 years in the private sector. I've been involved in international business. I understand the global mosaic of what Illinois is. I've also had the honor to serve as a citizen legislator, and I've seen Illinois now at the worst blood sport I have ever seen it. This is not easy to stand up and run here in the state of Illinois. But I'm the only Republican running for governor of the state of Illinois that's been able to win here. I've been able to carry the numbers I need in the city of Chicago. I've been able to carry the numbers downstate. I won. I got more votes than Pat Quinn did, and I'm down ballot as state treasurer. This is not easy. I know how to put it together. I would appreciate your vote for governor.
Senator Brady, your closing statement.
It is about winning and who can build on the Republican base. In the last election, I went from 150,000 votes in the primary to nearly 1.8 million. It's tough. As Treasurer Rutherford said before, politics in Illinois is tough. I've had $5 million in negative ads thrown at me, but I built the base of the party through social and fiscal conservative values. Senator Dillard's ad for Obama, saying he'd serve our country well as President of the United States, is a non-starter amongst Republicans and, frankly, independents. And with all due respect to Mr. Rauner, his support of Rahm Emanuel doesn't serve well with Republicans in a primary, and it doesn't work to win elections. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to defeat Pat Quinn. He's destroying our state. We need a governor who can work with the legislature on Republican principles, who will adamantly fight for the taxpayers with tax cuts and pension reform. I've done that. I've done it as state senator, and I'll do it as governor. I'll rebuild this Republican Party. We'll go on to win this race and make Illinois a state we can be proud of once again.
Mr. Rauner, your closing statement, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moderator. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to the people of Springfield. It's an honor to be with you tonight. I'm running for governor for one simple reason. I love our state passionately. This is my home. This is your home. This is our home. It's a very emotional issue to me. And I can't sit back and wait and watch while the career politicians here in our state government fail us and we deteriorate as a state. I just can't allow it. That's the reason I'm running. I'm not a politician. I'm a self-made business guy. It's a big decision, but I'm going to take it on. We're going to win. I'm running to accomplish 4 things. I'm going to focus like a laser on 4 things for all of us and our children and our grandchildren. More jobs in a booming economy, lower taxes and spending so we can reduce the tax burden on our homeowners and small business owners, great education and training and vocational training throughout the state of Illinois, and term limits on all the elected officials here in our state government so we restore public service again rather than career politicians making money from their power. Look forward to going to work for you. Thank you.
Senator Dillard.
The capital of Illinois is Springfield. It's not Chicago. State government is broken and its employees are demoralized. A governor needs to lead their employees, not demonize them. And I know we can turn this state around because I've done it before. As Governor Edgar's chief of staff, we had an unemployment rate below the national average, and the state's credit rating went up, and there was $1.5 billion surplus in the state treasury. It's that experience which makes me the only candidate in the Republican field who is tested and prepared to lead Illinois out of our crisis, and most importantly, the best candidate to send Pat Quinn packing. I ask for your vote, but more importantly, I ask for your commitment to make Illinois work again. Thank you very much.
Candidates, good luck in the primary. We'd like to thank our media panel as well as all of our partners here who helped make this debate possible. If you missed any part of tonight's debate, it will air again tonight on Fox Illinois at 10 o'clock immediately following your local news. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to make your vote count 1 month from today on March 19th. I'm Liz Foster. Have a great night. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our candidates a round of applause.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members.
Hello, I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. Most people never look at a school and think of it being an economic enterprise that spends tens of millions of dollars every year. They look at the school as a place their children attend for education, or perhaps as a place to attend a local sporting event. But handling the business of education is the job of the school business officials. We're the ones that keep track of the millions of dollars that come in and go out. Our members face a myriad of issues that include financing new buildings, paying teachers and staff, tracking our pension costs, and supervising the many businesses that contract with local schools. And that's why I'm so happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel connects us with legislators working on educational issues in the state capitol, as well as covering educational issues being discussed at conferences around the state. As we see in the debate over pensions, the many details involved in just that one issue, we need a news organization that's willing to give enough time to cover an important issue in depth. I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter most.
Next from Springfield, we offer an encore presentation of our interview with State Senator Bill Brady, GOP candidate for governor. We asked the senator what convinced him to run for governor a third time, his take on pension reform and how to improve Illinois' business climate, and why this time he expects to be elected governor. This runs about 30 minutes.
Senator Bill Brady, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Good to be with you again.
You, as anyone who follows politics will remember, you were the Republican nominee for governor the last time around. You squeaked by in the primary. I think you defeated Senator Dillard by, 193 votes or so, and were competitive, very competitive in the general election. In fact, I recall looking at the votes for some time during that night. You had the lead, and as I recall, and then you were coming. It was kind of bouncing back and forth, and eventually Governor Quinn obviously was the victor in that.
Right.
You have announced that you're going to be a candidate again in 2014. So having gone through this actually twice before, once being the nominee, why go for a third term, or attempt at the governorship?
Well, we believe in Illinois. I believe the state deserves better leadership. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't believe that if the rematch were today, I'd prevail against Governor Quinn, and likely the only Republican who would be able to build on the successes and the respect we earned from the voters in the last election. We won 98 counties, barely lost in 3, and didn't do as well as we wanted to in Cook County, and particularly in the Chicagoland area. But I think the voters have learned a lot. They've gotten more comfortable with my positions and my strengths, and I think they've gotten less comfortable with Pat Quinn and the shortcomings of his administration.
Before we get, I want to get into the issues, but when you look back at your own campaign and apply, what lessons did you learn, if any, from that campaign? That would you do anything different as you go into this one?
Well, there's all kinds of things you do different here or there. Some things that are outside of your control that you might try to alter the implications of which. But what I've probably learned the most is Illinois is a big state. I'm a small businessman in Bloomington, Illinois, who had run before, won a primary, built a base of support. But in a general election, it's a tough state, particularly if you're a Republican. This state is 40% Democrat, 30% Republican. We lost by less than 0.5%, which means we not only earned the base of the Republican Party, but we did real well with independents and some Democrats to overcome that. And building on that is the most important thing. Some people say you need to spend more time in Chicago, and they're right. We've reached out and worked with Latino groups and black organizations, particularly black ministerial associations, on jobs and public safety and reducing crime. But it's a mixture of getting better known, building on what we've built in Chicago and the Cook County area, as well as encouraging a bigger turnout in the 98 of 102 counties we did very well in.
You know, I'm curious, when you reach out to the black community, as you said you have, what response do you get?
Good response. They become much more comfortable with me. We share a lot of interests. We know that jobs are important. Under the Democratic control in Springfield, particularly Pat Quinn, we've lost 290,000 jobs. And that affects the livelihood of their families that they represent. We've seen crime run rampant. We're looking to change that through giving people the right of concealed carry, like we just did today in the General Assembly, overriding Governor Quinn's failed veto, as well as encouraging the U.S. Attorney's Office to work with local law enforcement to crack down on gun crime, making our streets safer, like we've seen happen in Richmond, Virginia, and other places where they've seen crime cut by as much as half. So there's a lot of commonality of interest, and clearly the Latino and the black communities, particularly in Chicago, have learned that the Democratic control, and particularly Governor Quinn, has not served them well.
You brought up what, as we tape this, we just had both the House and Senate override the governor's veto, and so the concealed carry bill that was passed in May is now going to be the law. And this on July the 9th, which was the deadline set by the federal court for that to happen. On that, give us your own thoughts on the concealed carry bill as passed.
Well, it's a historic day. It's a landmark day for Illinois. The courts ruled rightly that Illinois citizens should share the same constitutional rights that 49 other states have given them. The legislature worked hard to pass a bill learning from all the other states and learning that proper background checks, learning about how important education and training is to make the law of the land a good law. Unfortunately, the governor was disengaged or not as engaged as maybe he should have been in the process. He mandatorily vetoed the bill, forcing the Illinois General Assembly to come back at the last hour and override, which we knew we might have to do, wasting taxpayer dollars. But I think this points to the ineffectiveness of this administration. As I've said before, whether you like Pat Quinn or not, and I happen to think he's a nice guy, this administration has been ineffective in terms of dealing with the problems facing Illinois and taking a leadership role, whether it been concealed carry, pensions, balancing the budget, maintaining an infrastructure by preserving road fund dollars, and living within our means, and most importantly, the loss of jobs under Pat Quinn's reign as governor.
I was going to say, what do you, when you look at, and there's a variety of issues and ones I want to talk to, I want to, not only concealed carry, but pensions, the economy. When you look at what's happening to the state, what do you pick as the #1 issue and challenge facing it?
Well, I'd say the #1 issue is the loss of 290,000 jobs in the last 5 years, the net loss. That devastates families that are looking for gainful employment. It also has a bottom line impact to the state's budget. I estimate $4 to $4.5 billion a year. But that in itself requires solutions. It means fiscal responsibility, which means pension reform. Pension reforms means protecting the interests of the people in the state pension systems who've paid in each and every year, looking for their retirement years, but also balancing that with the interest of the taxpayers. I truly believe that we can give people what they've earned and balance the interest of the taxpayers if we come up with meaningful reform. To date, this governor just hasn't been able to get that job done. And it takes a strong governor to do that. It means reconciling state spending to living within your means. We have over $7 billion in unpaid bills. That's no way to run state government, and the hardship that places on the people we depend for human services and other things has adversely affected that. So when you look at the effect of fiscal mismanagement, lack of pension reform, that gives caution to the private sector who invests in jobs. And they've got a whole host of states, governors that are trying to poach our jobs away from us that, frankly, they're being successful because we haven't put our fiscal house in order. So we need someone who will stand up and understand the importance of that. But it also means things like workers' compensation reform to balance the interest of the injured worker along with the employer who's trying to employ that worker to gainfully employ them.
So a variety of things that would improve both the cost, the spending on the side, but also some of the business environment. And let me go to that. I mean, on one hand, to give people a little bit of a background who may not recall. So you're a small businessman. You have alluded to that. Let's talk about that. But I know you and I have talked off camera. Illinois is going to have to go through some tough choices in cutting the budget. You, as a businessman, had to go through some very tough times when the economy went down. Just remind us of what business are you in and what challenges did you face and how have you met them?
Well, I'm in the housing business. We employ several realtors and people associated with the real estate industry, home construction business, property management, mortgage finance, and others. And I don't know that we can think of recent history where that industry's been hit so hard. We had to reconcile our spending, live within our means, deleverage ourselves by getting rid of some debt and some assets that we thought would be productive subdivisions down the road. But we've done that, and we've been able to keep gainfully employing people. In fact, we started some new businesses, a water restoration business, and increased other areas of our business to survive. And that's what Illinois needs to do. It needs to realize what the next economy is going to look like. And then it needs to position itself to meet the challenges of the next economy and the jobs it will create. But it has to understand that in order to do so, you've got to be a solid place to make a business investment. Businesses know that if a government can't reconcile its spending to live within its means, it will go back on the taxpayers. It's more likely to go back on the taxpayers who can't vote, like businesses and other things. So it's very fearful of what poor operating governments will do. And we've seen that as we've tried to attract businesses at the local level within my Senate district and around the state.
Let me interject. When a lot of people, I think they don't understand why can't government live within its means, and they tend to look at their own home budget and go, you know, we've made cuts. The thing I point out to people, though, in government, both at the federal and state level, are the entitlement spending. The pension, as an example, is one of them. But the federal program of Medicaid is another, to where we have this spending on automatic pilot. As the baby boomers retire, as our pension costs are going to be going up unless change is made. On the pension, you and I have talked about it before. You've been involved. You're a member of the conference committee. As we say this, we don't know what a conference committee product would be that would try to be sold to both House and Senate members that they could vote for. But what changes, as you've heard the issues, you know the issue, what are your thoughts on how we can control the state pensions, and to what extent do we make it both A, constitutional, and B, fair to those who are promised something?
Well, let's put this in the proper framework. First of all, it's unfortunate that the people who will pay for the price of the reforms are the people who've taught our children, who've protected our streets, who've built our roads, who've done the things that our state employees do for us. And it's unfortunate. But after a decade of governors not funding pension systems, legislatures passing budgets that didn't fund pension systems, be it Republican and Democrat. I mean, a lot of people have asked me, Bill, why haven't you voted for budgets? I haven't voted for budgets because they failed to hold the test of fiscal responsibility, which meant funding our pensions. This governor's taken 2 opportunities to borrow to fund the pensions, and it created an environment that is much where we are today. In fact, the committee that I'm on will tell you, COGFA, our local government forecasting unit, proved to us that over half the cost associated with the unfunded pensions came because governors and legislators either borrowed and didn't fund, or created debt and took holidays and all those things. So it is unfortunate that we're $100 billion plus unfunded. But in order to protect and preserve as best we can the interest of the people who've paid into the system, we're going to need to reform the way we move forward. And the way we move forward has to do a lot with the cost of living increases that people get, and contributions that are going to be required to be made by people who are employed by these systems, or not by the systems, but employed by the government, that will go into these systems. Right now, we're trying to focus on the university president's program, which would cost for an increased contribution from current employees. Pretty much they've agreed to that in other legislation.
And when you say we're trying to do that, we're being what, the conference
Well, there's
committee?
a conference committee of 10 of us who were appointed to try to resolve this. And so
I want to make that as distinct from the Brady campaign.
That's a good point. Although many of the provisions of what we're doing are things I've been talking about for years. But it is the conference committee that's laying this out. And we're trying to arrive at a goal in terms of savings that is yet undefined, but that will strengthen and solidify the system to meet the obligations, but yet protect the taxpayers so that we can continually fund education and public safety and transportation. So the 2 really key elements here in terms of the reforms are asking prospectively employees to make a larger contribution, 1 or 2%, likely 2. 2 is to, rather than receive a guaranteed 3% cost of living increase each and every year that is compounded, the university presidents have suggested that half of the actual cost of living increase, half of that would be applied, and they've suggested it be compounded. Now, we're looking at variations of that, but we're using the framework of that proposal to see if we can hit a number that provides enough savings, coupled with the funding. The key here is if the requirements to fund come down, the ability to fund will be easier and yet guaranteed, because that's what we need to make sure. We need to make sure that governors like Quinn and Berkowitz and legislators can't not take seriously the funding of our pension systems. So those are the key elements of this program.
I don't want to get, to be fair to you, I don't want to get too lost in, I mean,
Sure.
It's an important issue. To focus more on the Bill Brady campaign, but to point out, as we tape this, the conference committee has not come out. People are speculating, at least people I talked to are speculating, maybe by the end of July. There might be something to be considered in August. Who knows? We will see.
I hope we don't go into August.
Do you think, relative to pensions, and we'll move on to something else, maybe, but do you think that whatever reforms are going to be coming will be in place prior to the next governor being sworn in?
Well, if we can arrive at something, frankly, I think it's critical that we get something done in July. If we don't, I fear that we may not get to where we need to be until there's a different governor. But I think the way this is structured, the reforms could take place as early as the beginning of next year, depending on the court challenge and some other things, if we can get this. And again, this is all about making sure that everything everybody's earned to date is protected and that we don't diminish what they've earned. And that's why it's important to us for the constitutional question that we are working in under the constitutional provision of offer and consideration. So making some alterations, some positive, some that may not be prospectively as positive as they would have had.
Illinois has a massive problem with finances, everyone knows. The pensions that we've been talking about is one of them. Last year, in 2012, the legislature made changes to the Medicaid system to try to cut down the cost on that. But we now find that the state is also looking to make changes going forward to Medicaid that would increase the Medicaid rolls, which is health care for the indigent, by 500,000 people.
Right.
It somewhat sends a mixed message. One would think that Illinois is flush with money if they're looking to expand the Medicaid rolls by 500,000.
Yeah, and this is where the legislature and the governor, I think, were misled by the federal government. With the promise, oh, we'll pay for all of it. Well, that never happens. The expansion of Medicaid this year, I think, will prove to diminish our ability to provide critical services to those that were already entitled to those services.
The thing I think is interesting when we look at Illinois and we think of it as a blue state is that really it's predominantly the Cook County, Chicago area that's solidly Democratic. And yet, on the other hand, 2/3 of the population of Illinois lives in the Chicago land area, not just Cook County. But what do you do to win those votes? I mean, obviously, Cook County or Chicago hasn't elected a Republican mayor since, what, the 1920s or something. People have said in the past, they said it before you got the nomination, that you were too conservative to be elected statewide. Now you came very close. What concerns do people have? It seems like one, abortion might be one of the issues. You're pro-life, right? But as you talk to the Chicagoland area voters, what could you do this time around to get more votes out of Chicago than what you got before?
Well, let me tell you a little story. After the election, Governor Jeb Bush gave me a call and said, you know, Bill, I don't know if you're going to run again or not, but let me tell you a story. He said, I wouldn't have won the second time if I didn't lose the first. He said, in big states like Illinois and Florida, where you're not well known, he said, you may recall George was running in Texas when I was running in Florida, and George was down 5 points the week before the election. Like you, I was up 5 points the week before the election. I lose by 60,000, you lose by 30, but George wins. So the difference in those states where you're just newly introduced in terms of a general election, big states like that, is those horrific attack ads tend to push the undecided. Bush family was so well known in Texas that George wins. I was not well known in Florida, and I lost. And in your first time, you weren't well known in Illinois. So big states like that, you got to get better known. And I think that's going to be one of the things strengths that we can build on that no other candidate. That we're better known, people are more comfortable, and I think that will help us. We not only won 98 counties, but realizing that those counties included the suburban counties to cook. So we did very well. In a lot of places, people didn't think. In fact, better than recent candidates for governor. So I really believe we'll build on those strengths. We only need 16,000 more votes to win the next election. And I think it's the respect that we've earned on our policies, the positions that we've taken that will earn us the additional votes we need. And that squarely is focused on what we can do economically to enhance the lives of the citizens of Illinois.
You know, as we tape this, we don't know who will be the Democratic nominee, so it's not as if you might even be running against Governor Quinn. But using the current governor, Governor Quinn, as a example, how would you be different? In other words, let's take the management side of it. Compare and contrast on some of these issues, like the budget and spending and the rest, pensions. What would you be doing differently than Governor Quinn?
That's a great question. One of the things we won't be doing is misleading the people. In the last election, I told them the truth. We're going to consistently tell them the truth, and then we're going to pass it. We told them that the pension system in Illinois is unsustainable, and we need reforms. Governor Quinn said it's not a problem. But yet, I think that's one of his problems in addressing the problem. At the core of his beliefs, I'm not sure where he is. We said we've got to reconcile state spending to live within our means without raising taxes. Governor Quinn said, I will never raise taxes 2%. Well, what did he do? He raised taxes 2%. It tears at the fabric of integrity, and it tears at the economic fabric of our state. We're not going to let taxes continue to be at the level they're at, and we'll live up to that promise. We are going to redefine government spending to prioritize it so that we're doing the best we can with every dollar we've got. And we are going to solve the pension crisis. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the things we've always said, and we're going to turn the state around and then focus on how we can be a place that creates private sector jobs, enhancing the lives of families. But we're not going to mislead the public, and that's going to be pivotal. And I think the people learned from the last election. Most of the things we said needed to be done, even the Democrats now agree need to be done.
We touched on the expansion of Medicaid that is part of the Obamacare thing. Is that something, though, that you would oppose? Would you try to get the state of Illinois out of that expansion, or how would you address that issue?
Well, it's going to be very difficult once you're there. I think the key to Medicaid is making sure that we get the best care for every dollar we have to spend and serving the best people in the most affordable way. I also think a key is to make sure that only those people who are entitled to Medicaid receive it. One of the major concerns, well, we would verify that they are Illinois residents entitled to Medicaid and not just someone who came in, got a card, and starts receiving benefits. So we would use various standards of verification to make sure that they truly do qualify for the benefits offered in Illinois.
I presume...
And on a continual basis, that they continue to be eligible for those benefits.
I was going to say, I presume when your campaign, when you were the nominee and you went around, did you meet with leading executives of companies, corporations and on? What kind of things were they telling you that they want to have changed in the state? And to what extent did that support what your thoughts were, or did you get more of an education from that?
You're absolutely right. That's where many of the platforms and the ideas that we're putting forth come from. They say, you know, how do I convince my company to invest more money in a state that's $7.5 billion behind in paying its bills? We need you to live within your means. How do I convince my company to invest in a state that has $100 billion unfunded pension liabilities? We need you to rectify that. They know that Illinois is ripe for opportunity. I mean, we have more resources in the state than I can find in any other state, from the soil and the agricultural base to the coal and the oil and the natural gas that lies beneath the soil, to the infrastructure and right-of-way we have for rail, roads, river, and air, the university systems that we have and the educational opportunities those provide, the the basic diversity we have from Chicago to Metropolis and in between, as well as the fact that we are located in the center of this country's economic opportunity or universe, if not the nation, if not the world's. So they know that this is the place they want to be. But it's hard to invest in a state that raises taxes on the backs of businesses and families, extracting 1 week's pay, and a state that's still, with that, and we knew it would be a problem, because when you raise taxes, you drive down private sector opportunity. When you drive down private sector opportunity, you lose jobs. When you lose jobs, you lose taxes. It was a vicious cycle that Pat Quinn and the Democrats put us on that we need to reverse. But that's what the businesses tell us. They also say we need workers' compensation reform, fairness in workers' compensation, so that they can be competitive with other states, so that our injured workers are treated fairly, but not in a way that increase costs so excessively that it's hard to compete in Illinois. So these are the foundational principles that they want to see. I'd say they're also worried about an educated workforce, making sure that our institutions of higher education, our schools are funded properly. Property taxes are another thing. We've got to make sure that we dedicate more dollars to education as a percentage and a priority, so that the property tax burden on families and on businesses can be diminished and not such a burden that it's a barrier to employment in Illinois.
You know, there's always sometimes I hold myself back from asking certain questions because you can get lost in the minutia of certain things. But when you decided here, it's got to be tough on you as an individual. It's got to be tough on your family to be going around. It's a lot of sacrifice, an inordinate amount of time on the road and away from just relaxing at home. How hard of a decision was it to say, you know, you want to do it again for you and your family?
Well, it is, you're right, it's a sacrifice. I was raised to give back to my community and my state in terms of public service, but it does take a lot of time. And it was a bitter, pill to swallow, losing by less than 1%. But as I traveled around the state, I talked to people and they said, you've got to finish the job. Clearly, I've not been raised to quit on anything, particularly the people of Illinois or this election. I do believe, like Jeb Bush and Bobby Jindal and others, it sometimes takes more than one election in a general election to win and build on it. And I'm the only one, I believe, that has the opportunity to do that within the Republican Party. So it was in some ways a tough decision, time away from family, but our children are not at home right now. Katie's a nurse in Chicago, and William's a lawyer in Chicago, and Duncan's a sophomore in college. So a little more free time than what we had before. So a little easier from that standpoint, but it is a lot of time, but it's also very rewarding. As you travel around the state, the people of Illinois are gracious, they're caring, they really believe in the future of Illinois, and it's rewarding in the sense that you can help them. I just walked in a parade in Arlington Heights over the 4th of July, and the hundreds of people who said, Bill, you got to finish the job for us. Make sure you win this time. It's an important part of the process, and it makes it so much easier.
All right, well, Senator Bill Brady, we appreciate you taking the time. Maybe as we get closer to the primary, we can follow up with you and do this again.
Absolutely, Terry.
Thanks
so much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Next from Chicago, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz sits down with Chicago Alderman John Arena. The two discuss the approval of new charter schools in Chicago and whether or not charter schools do a better job of educating students than Chicago's public school system. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will, as I promised, be doing, well, lots of public policy. There's political aspects to education and education spending and so forth, but I think the show is really more public policy this evening, some politics, and, it's just important stuff. So we're just going to get right to it with Alderman John Arena. He has been, now, this is your third year, right?
Third year, first term, yeah.
Northern Illinois University grad. He's got a wife and 2 kids. They're both in the public schools, is that right?
Yes, they are.
Okay. He's been active in the community. You live in in Portage Park,
In
right?
Portage Park, correct.
Been active in that area for what, the last 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, 18 years.
All right, so you're not a Johnny-come-lately. You just said, make me an alderman, huh?
No, I worked hard to get here.
All right, so without fooling around, just let's get right down to it. We're taping this, as I said, on January 27th. About a week ago, the Chicago School Board of the CPS,
yeah, the
Chicago
Board of Education.
Board of Education, thanks. They voted on a requested 17 new charter schools. They only approved 7. Mm-hmm. But actually, the CPS itself only recommended how many actually be approved? The 7?
CPS analysis, they recommended 9. Actually, there was 21 applications total. 4 of those were pulled back before the actual board meeting by the applicants themselves. 9 of the 17 were recommended for passage by CPS, and ultimately they passed for 7.
And some of this that are passed are conditional, is that right?
That's true. For example, Intrinsic, which is a new charter school, does not have 2 years track record of academic achievement, which is one of the requirements that's required. So they got pushed to the 2015-16 school year. At that point, they'll look at them, look at their track record, and kind of make a determination whether they should move forward with another campus.
Are they included in the 7 that are approved? So it's 7 are 4 or 5 of those conditional?
I don't know exactly how many were conditional, but I know there was probably 3 or 4 of them were conditional.
And why was it, you say there are only 7 or 9 that were recommended for approval, right? And
yeah.
The board only approved 7. Why were only 9 recommended? Did the CPS say what happened, why they were not recommending approval of those other ones?
They didn't get into the details in the testimony at the time, but there was an RFP put together. By law, CPS has to accept any proposal for a charter school. So what CPS tried to do, and I think this is rational, is at least kind of try to funnel them down at least to a place where they could evaluate them in a rational time frame at the same time, instead of taking them one-off, throughout the course of the year. So they put out an RFP saying these are the things we'd like for if we're going to do any expansion. The only thing is the individual schools didn't have to, do exactly what was asked in the RFP. So CPS used that as a bit of a test to say, well, these are areas of need, do they meet academic standards and so forth. And some of those just didn't measure up to the standards that were put into the RFP. And I think that's what drove CPS's recommendation of only 9 out of the 17.
With the standards being basically achieving a high academic performance?
Being in a level 1 or level 2 in their academic achievements consistently. I guess making sure that they were open to all children and accessible. What were their physical needs, and did they have a physical location identified? Either an existing building or plans to build a building? Did they have the finances to build that or retrofit an existing building? So there was a long list of things that they needed to kind of be able to measure up to.
Now, this is sort of a basic 101 course, almost a charter school 101 course. Mm-hmm. Because the charter schools come in, we said they'll get a certain amount of money from the city,
yeah,
essentially, that would go to a traditional neighborhood school, and the charter schools are viewed as a public school, and they will get funds to operate that charter school, which is taxpayer funds, right?
That's true, and it's measured on a per pupil basis. So, and now all CPS schools have gone to a per pupil funding model. It used to be, prior to this past school year, that there was 2 different models for funding. So charter schools were on a per pupil model, and CPS neighborhood schools were on a kind of bucket model where they would each get a certain amount of money that was not dictated based on the number of students that were at the school.
So now it is per student. So because sometimes people say the charter schools, at least in terms of operating costs, they say that the charter schools are getting more money than the traditional neighborhood schools. Now what you're telling me is if it's all kosher, if they all do it the way they're supposed to, then it should be exactly the same in terms of operating costs. Charter schools get no more or no less for operating the school would a traditional neighborhood school. Is that right?
As it sits right now, charter schools get slightly less money per pupil than neighborhood schools, but that's because most of the time they don't have a building. They're it's covering the educational component and the programming component, but not, as I understand it, the building
costs,
and
right.
the capital costs.
Okay. And what is it per student that they get? Do you know what that number is?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I don't want to quote a number out of
Well, because then it becomes all very difficult. We got to do this, really get this right sometime, and maybe get the right person to. And I'm not saying you're the wrong person, but maybe get the person who specializes in this, maybe in the city, because if you take all of the entire budget for CPS, you know what that is approximately? The whole thing, capital costs, variable
probably
costs.
Probably in the. Probably in the billions of dollar range, $6 billion.
Yeah, about $6 billion.
Yeah.
It's been about that high, and then it went down for a year or two, and things are rough. Now it's going back up. So let's say about $6 billion. And there are about 400,000 students, right?
Yeah.
So if you divide 400,000 into $6 billion, if we don't use a calculator, just do some quick math. I've cheated, I've done it before. It's 15,000 per kid per year, right?
Okay.
But they don't get, the charter school doesn't get 15,000 per kid, not even close, right? Do you know what it is?
I don't know the number.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're saying you're not getting it because...
You're getting slightly less, but not, I don't know.
I think much less. And the report card doesn't use that figure. If you ask Ram, how much are we spending per kid per year? And maybe Ram thinks this. I'm not saying he's being deceitful. He wouldn't say 15,000. I bet he'd say 10, maybe 11, okay? It's just not true. It's not true. Because the budget, as we said, is $6 billion, 400,000. So anyway, it's 15,000. So they say 10 or 11, then they cut from there. And the charter school is supposed to come up with their capital costs on their own, right?
Yeah, initial capital, that's correct.
So they've got to go to private donors and say, sort of beg, okay? Whereas the traditional neighborhood schools, they don't have to. They get that. Is it fair? Do you think that's fair?
I
Is that fair
think
competition?
public, because it's called public education. So, we got to step back and say we have a system that says everybody's, we should provide an equal education to all. Unfortunately, how that money is divided up from a capital standpoint hasn't been equitable across the city. It's why you have some buildings that are maintained on the north side and some buildings that are falling apart on the south and west side. So there's politics that plays into how capital is spent.
Politics in Chicago?
Can you imagine
I'm
something
shocked.
like that?
It's like
Yeah, I know it's a new
Casablanca,
idea that I'm
gambling in the
introducing here
brothel,
today, that politics would play into how we spend taxpayer dollars in different neighborhoods. And it's unfortunate because the basic principle, and what I think we can all agree on, is we want everybody to have access to an equal quality education, a high quality education. And we haven't been doing that. And that's where we kind of find ourselves now, is how do we dig out of the hole we've created by creating a system that's, that's separate but supposedly equal. Yeah. And that's where the challenge of the model of private funding for schools versus public funding, and an expectation of, well, why do you have to go out and get capital money when these schools don't? My argument is we need to focus on the broader system, which is where most of our kids are educated, in our neighborhood schools, and making sure that that is equitable and a powerful, high-quality education.
Let's bring that. You didn't see it because you can't look back there. I told you.
I can't do that, I've been told.
You're not the president yet. The president did that. Obama was here, and I said, don't. People remember before he was president, Barack was on the show 6 times. And I was telling him on the first show, don't turn around and look at the other camera or the monitor, because you look distorted. And showing he knew what he was doing, he did. And he looked distorted, and he became president.
There you go.
Anyway, but let me ask our director, Terry Paul. This is really good. If you could just bring back that last graphic that we just put up there, because it talks about some of the reform motives. And you mentioned some of them. One is equity. We want equity and fairness across the school system. The other is efficiency. We want these schools, whether they're good schools, whether they're select enrollment schools, whether they're charter schools. And charter schools are like neighborhood schools in that they're both open enrollment. So whatever kind of school is, we want them to be efficient. And I would say we want some crime reduction here, because most of us believe that education, if we do it right, makes people better citizens, gives them the opportunity to earn a living, an honest living, and they're less likely to get involved in crime.
Yeah.
If the kid's in 3rd or 4th grade and he's not learning, or she's not learning how to read, the rational thing is just drop out, become a drug seller. Yeah, you might get killed, but it's probably more rational than staying in the school where you're not learning how to read, right?
Well, I guess
I'm not advocating kids like don't try
please,
this
kids,
at home.
don't follow that advice.
Yeah, no, but it is a rational thing, and it leads to the idea, and this is why it's so important. When we have that graphic, we can bring that up. That this is about saving kids. This is not an academic discussion we're having here about charter schools or voucher schools. No, no. This is about saving kids.
Yeah.
400,000 kids out there in the CPS, and if the taxpayers, whether you live in the city or not, or if you work in the city, we're all involved, if the adults don't figure out how to get this right, how to truly teach these kids how to read,
where do we go?
They're in trouble. They're involved in gangs. They shoot each other. Somebody gets caught in the middle. That innocent person gets shot. So it really is about saving kids. And last thing I'll say, and then you come back and comment on this, but remind people, education reform started with Mayor Richard M. Daley in 1995. Mm-hmm. And now we're 18 years later, and Rahm Emanuel has been here 2 years. And I would say, I could argue, that in the last 18 years, education has almost not improved at all.
Yeah,
almost
our numbers have not moved appreciably.
We've lost an entire generation of kids. Mm-hmm. And so for people out there who say, you want more time? You want more time to try something? I say you got a year. I say Rahm should have said you had a year when he first came in, 2 years, and he's done nothing. Nothing. I mean, maybe they had 15 new charter schools he might point to, maybe 7 more. That's a drop in the bucket, even if he's right that the charter schools outperform.
I guess what I will say is he has done something. He's closed 50 schools, taken 50 community centers out of those neighborhoods that are troubled neighborhoods. That's a big movement. And now, whether it's right or wrong, we can get to. But he has done something. He has shown that there's an agenda that's basically continuing in a very aggressive way, an 18-year policy that Daley started and allowed to just kind of go on in an undirected way, I feel, where we're going to start creating a system of choice. We started selective enrollment schools, magnet schools, charter schools. When you said that charters and neighborhood schools are similar in that they're open enrollment, that's not entirely true. Neighborhood school has to take, by law, any child that's within its attendance boundaries. It has to accept them. Charter schools are a lottery system. From anywhere in the city, any student, any parent can apply to put their child into a charter school. South side, north side, west side, you can go to any school, any of those schools that you can get selected in that lottery. That's important because you are now saying that the neighborhood school, which is that center of our communities historically, you and I probably grew up in communities where you went to your neighborhood school, that was your one choice, right? But it was probably a pretty good school. It had opportunities. With charters, when you get selected, they have to accept that student, but they don't necessarily have to keep them. They have tactics they use to push kids out or move them out of the school, which then the kid will then cycle back to a neighborhood school, hopefully, or drop out if he's a problem kid and can't captured by the system. But that neighborhood school then has to take him back, and the money doesn't necessarily follow that student back to the neighborhood school. So there's some things going on in the background that charters do pull resources away, and they are able to aggregate a population of children that are better performing kids, that are not the problems children that really are what trouble our system. We have to find a way to bridge that gap. A child that can't be engaged in a class of 30 kids that needs that special attention, our neighborhood schools for decades have had those very resources are the ones that have been pulled away through budget cuts, whether it's social services, truant officers, supports, even down to nursing care. You know, nurses when children are hurt or need attendance, psychologists. These things have been pulled away, and teachers have been told you have to then supplement that activity.
With all due respect, Alderman, I've talked to some teachers, okay? Have you talked to teachers in the public schools?
Quite a few.
Okay. Have you talked in the really, really tough areas on the south side and the west side where it's almost impossible to control these students, okay? Have you talked to anybody there? This is not your ward, the 45th ward.
Not.
That is not your ward. Yours is a relatively affluent ward, relatively white ward,
Absolutely.
Hispanic maybe 25%, 7% Asian, 2% black, the rest white. Relatively high income.
You're right.
This is not your ward.
Absolutely.
Now, you talk to these people where they say they just can't control these kids. They go to the principal doesn't know what to do. The principal maybe gets fired, the principal fires the teachers, and at the end of the day, nothing happens. And those kids get weeded out who are real discipline problems, but some don't, and it's just hell.
Yeah.
It's not working. This is my point.
Yeah. But I guess
gone on
my
for
very
like 5
point
minutes,
that
and I let you go on for 5
yeah.
minutes, and it's not working. And all I'm saying to you, you're not coming up with anything new. I don't mean it's your job, but the city of Chicago isn't. Ron came up, he said charter schools are a way of introducing competition, introducing innovation. A lot of the rules and regulations we have that don't allow for that innovation don't apply to the charter schools, okay? And that's a good thing because, frankly, I don't know how to do this, and you probably don't know how to do this, and Ron doesn't know how. But, you know, in the same way we didn't know how to make smartphones 25 years ago because my name's not Steve Jobs and yours isn't, but there were people who did.
Yeah.
If we had competition coming into education, some people are going to figure out, how do you take these really tough kids, get their attention, motivate them, and teach them how to read?
Okay.
That's
Can I say a basic premise of charters when they were started? And there are certain charter operators that go towards the core of what charters were intended to do, which is that very thing you just illuminated, which is the kids that are hard to reach, that are in social situations that are just crushing to the ability to be educated. Okay, they've never learned in their youth and how to become a student, and the teachers are then caretakers. They're not educators. There are, like, Youth Connection charter schools. Their mission and their focus is on kids that the CPS, the average system, right? CPS was never, no system is designed to do everything from the very worst to the very best equally.
Right. You need to specialize.
You need specialization.
Right.
Charters were designed originally, one of the very concepts of it was to say, let's find a way to bring these kids in. And there is schools like that. What's happened, though, over time is people have said, well, hey, how can we monetize this and not have to deal with that downside of the really expensive to educate child that CPS can't address? That is where the charter school system has moved towards. Let's just get towards the best, the brightest. Let's pull those kids and aggregate them.
I think that's totally unfair.
Well, I mean,
I guess with all due respect, I mean, you only have about 12. You have about 12% of the kids now in charter schools, about 50,000 students. Okay, your side has the other 350,000, and you got the select enrollment, the Walter Payton's, okay, and the Jones, and a lot of people like Alderman Ferretti comes out and he says, "Oh, schools are doing fine," and he gives me Walter Payton. Now that's really deceptive. Alderman Ferretti, you come on this time and you give me schools that are not select enrollment that are doing exceedingly well. No more, fooling around. You want to be mayor, Alderman Ferretti? You got to start, playing straight, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So there are charter schools who do well, who do better, and they don't do it by getting just the best kids. Number one, 85% of the kids in CPS are black or Hispanic and relatively low income. There are not, look, I'm not saying there are a bunch of bright kids. There are many bright kids in that group. But in general, you're talking about kids who are not like the cream of the cream. Now, some of these kids want to learn, and they're easier to teach.
Yeah.
And some of these kids don't. And we need to figure out how to make it a better environment for learning. And things you said about, like, okay, they just weed them out and the public schools don't. No, that's not. Even at New Trier, they have vocationals. They have alternative schools. When the kids don't work out at New Trier, when they can't control them, they send them somewhere else to another public school. And you folks do some of that in CPS, okay? You don't just keep the kids. They have schools that specialize. And you've got special ed schools right in your ward.
Absolutely.
Okay, right? What is it, okay?
Beard,
okay?
Yeah.
It's a special. So
but
it is not true.
That's for students.
It is not
yeah, but
true.
those are not.
Excuse me. It is not true that every neighborhood school does everything. You do have specialization.
I specifically said that the neighborhood schools are designed to take the broad middle and do the best it can. Yes, that's where society and public. If a parent wants a specific type of education, they do have choice. There's There's private, there's parochial schools, there's all kinds of choices that a parent can make. Within the CPS system, we've created a system where there is choice, where selective enrollment has taken out of the high school network and put those into schools that are concentrating the higher performing children away from the
select
neighborhood
enrollment,
school.
but that's nothing to do with charters.
No. Well, it's a system, and if we only talk about one aspect of the system.
Walter Payton's not a charter, is it?
No, it's a selective
enrollment school. It was designed for one thing. Okay, Daley saw he's losing business. He's not able to attract businesses here because he brings the business here, and it's in the city. Then these people have to go out in the suburbs. He said, no, I'll create some good schools. If your kids are bright, if they can test into this, they don't have to go to the suburbs. They can go to Payton.
Exactly. Or Lane, where my son goes.
Or a number of schools.
I'm lucky enough that he goes there.
But my point is, that's not the charter thing. The charter thing was to deal specifically with kids who are not that, who are low income, who don't have ideal environments, but maybe they want to learn, but they still do a lottery, okay? Yeah. So the kids who go to the charter school, they won the lottery. The kids who don't, they lost. Their parents are generally the same motivation. Some people say, oh, the charter school has the, no. And then people study this, okay? We're not going to go through all those studies, but people who study this, they look at the same kids from the same socioeconomic background, same parents, same motivation, and guess what? The charter schools on average, Carol Marine, the charter schools on average outperform the traditional neighborhood schools. Someday we'll have a debate on that. We're not going to do it
because
tonight.
The data doesn't show that.
Well, I think it does.
Okay. So
and in your own district, I've looked at some of those words. They're certainly in the high schools you got a relatively small percentage of kids taking AP classes and a very small percentage who are passing those classes. And when you looked at your grade schools in terms of the report cards, and I've done some of this, and we'll have more time, I'll go through and give you a chance, but I've done some of this, and you see on those report cards, maybe 9–12% exceed the level. I've been told by the experts that's the level that shows the kid in 3rd or 4th grade is on that college path. So you get 10–12% of the kids who are essentially reading at grade level, doing math at grade level. With all due respect, the schools are not really doing justice in your own ward.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not. I walked into
it's not because of excuse me. It's not because of charter schools.
Okay.
It's not because of charter schools.
And I started this by saying, for 18 years, we've been taking a path that hasn't done anything to say we can create a few selective enrollment schools and a few magnets and a few charters, and it's not enough that deals with the broad middle of kids we're supposed to be educating at a high level. We abdicated that. So that we could get a few successes so we could show the business community here there's still an opportunity in Chicago. It was the short-term win at the expense of the long-term gain about repurposing the system and figuring out within a broad system of how we educate our kids. So with change to a selective enrollment, and we talked about this a little bit before.
Selective enrollment is a distraction because it's still a very small percentage of the kids.
My point exactly.
And
we're focusing on Schurz High. If you try to say that Schurz High School, if you try to say that Schurz High School, which has not gotten the resources that schools like Jones, that schools like
they got a lot of resources. That's the thing.
They have not gotten a lot of resources compared to these. We spent $120 million on Jones Elementary to put a pool on the 4th floor, so it could be a showpiece for a class in our society, and ignore the middle and the lower class. You want to know what it changes education for across the board? Household income. There's a direct line between household income and whether a child performs well in school.
Not true.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Not.
It is absolutely true.
Have you ever heard of Hell's Franciscan?
No.
It's a black school, black kids on the south side. They send 96% of those kids, and that's from not a high socioeconomic area. Where? To 4-year colleges. So it is not true that these kids are not.
Is that a free school? Is that a free open school, or are those parents paying?
No, it's a tuition. I mean,
it's a tuition-based school.
No, it's like a $4,000 or $5,000 tuition, and some of them are on scholarship. Okay.
I'm saying not the same.
No, you guys in the city are spending $15,000 per kid.
Population.
Excuse me, you guys are spending $15,000 per kid per year on average. They're spending $5,000 and do a better job.
They're spending more than $5,000. That is, there's no school that's operating at that level.
You can find St. Joseph. You can find a number of parochial schools who are doing just that. They are spending much less and getting better results with kids who are black, who are Hispanic.
How many kids attend that school? And what is the teacher-student ratio?
It's not so
it's
different
not
from yours. No,
30
it really
kids. I guarantee you it's not 30 kids per class.
We've got to come back. We've got to cover a few topics quickly. Minimum wage is coming up, right?
Yep.
You know, basic economics. You ever take a course in economics?
In college, yeah.
Yeah. Remember, if you raise the wage, the demand goes down and the supply goes up. If you have a minimum wage, you raise the wage above the market wage, which is what unions do as well. Demand goes down, supply goes up. You cause unemployment. Do you understand that?
I don't agree with it, but
But
that's
every
okay.
80% of the economists would tell you that. You don't have to be a conservative economist.
Yeah, 80% of the economists said that we were doing just for 2006, 2007.
Not really.
And we're
No,
at
not
the last,
really.
well,
No, not
that's,
really.
yeah, that's
Okay.
what we heard over and over again. So
No,
the minimum
people-
wage,
yeah. I
adjusted
didn't
for
say that. I'm
inflation,
an economist.
minimum wage was started in somewhere in the early 1960s. Adjusted for inflation, you would be at about $10 an hour if you just adjusted for inflation. If you adjust for productivity, you should be about $15.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director for the Arc of Illinois. We fight for the rights and needs for 220,000 infants, children, and adults with intellectual and other developmental disabilities and their families. With a bit of support, people with developmental disabilities can live a full life in the community. This is accomplished in a variety of ways, such as being included in their neighborhood schools alongside their non-disabled friends, being supported to live in their own homes instead of being locked away in institutions. Diversity makes our community better. And the good news, doing the right thing, investing in community supports, also saves taxpayers money. In fact, it costs taxpayers about half as much to support people with disabilities in community homes where they're better cared for than it costs to have them housed in institutions. Advancing positive public policy by supporting the development of community services best serves the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is our greatest goal, developing inclusive communities so everyone can live a full life in the community. That's why I'm so proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. At its core, politics is about people and their needs, and the Illinois Channel's coverage of our issues allow us to tell the story of people with disabilities and their families, not in a quick soundbite, but in full, unedited interview in which our parents can tell their story, what they want for their child with a disability, and why they were concerned about what the state was doing. Isn't that the kind of coverage we all want of politics? Coverage that ties us to the issues that really matter and in a way that doesn't shortchange the ability of those impacted to get their message out. I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director of the Arc of Illinois and a proud member of the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter the most.
Next from Chicago, we talked to school superintendent and author of the book Fuel for Learning, Dr. Raymond Lauk. Dr. Lauk discusses how he's applied the lessons he'd learned in corporate America to improve education and the learning process. This runs about 7 minutes.
Dr. Raymond Lauk, you're the author of Fuel for Learning, and thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And tell us just a little bit about your book and how you came to write it.
Certainly. I've been a superintendent since 1993, and I've been working on developing school cultures that are focused on improving student achievement. And I worked at GE for 3 years. And when I went to GE, that culture at GE is very different than public education. And so when I came back to public education, I took those cultural aspects, the leadership behaviors of GE, and adapted them for public education.
What would someone who worked in public education and had not worked at GE, what would they learn?
One of the biggest things is focus. And in public education, we have so many areas to attend to, but schools that really increase student achievement are focused. They're very focused. They say no to a lot of things and really concentrate on what's most important. There's also the other issue, because FUEL stands for focus, urgency, energy, and enthusiasm, and learning from mistakes and successes. At GE, we really compressed the time frame anytime we had projects. We would start some initiative, and within a week, start to assess it and get feedback and evaluate it. In schools, we can't do anything under 3 to 5 years. That's crazy. And so we've really got to compress the time frame. And that also means that things aren't always going to go perfectly, but by far we'll have way more progress with mistakes along the way, but that's accepted. It's expected even.
Yeah, as we often say, you learn by doing often, right? And now, you were saying the focus. What is it about the culture of schools, on the other hand, that doesn't allow for focus and takes 3 to 5 years instead of 8 weeks?
One of the activities that I do, because in my workshops, I do some improv comedy activities. And one of the first activities we do is a mirroring activity. And people have to pair up, focus on each other's eyeballs, and then through peripheral vision, mirror the images. People hate that because it's uncomfortable for them. And that's the same issue that really illustrates why focus is so difficult. It's uncomfortable.
And why is it uncomfortable?
I think it's an accountability issue, because when we're zeroing in on one aspect, you can really measure effectiveness on that. When you've got 20 different goals, well, your energy is dispersed across all those areas. But when you're focusing on just a few most important critical mission areas, it's easier to hold people accountable, and that makes people uncomfortable.
Now, we've heard throughout the years all these different theories of education and how to change it, and you know that, you've been around it. How do we know that this works, and are there any data points to assess that this is an approach that is going to really give you better results? Sure. And to what extent does it give it? Is it a marginal difference? Is it a major difference?
Well, I can say from my experience in my district, 3 years ago, we were the highest achieving school district in the state at our poverty rate or higher, which was 85%. We focused on student achievement, on raising it and closing the achievement gap. We really went in with a focus. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a culture where everyone's happy and holding hands and singing. It's not that at all. But it's focused on raising student achievement.
And again, first of all, your district is what?
Blue Island School District.
And what kind of population does that have as far as student population?
It's a majority minority school district. We range between 80 to 90% poverty.
And so obviously if it could work there, I mean, then it's going to be showing you. Dr. Lauk, before we close out, you also mentioned energy. Talk about that. What role does that have in educating students?
Right. In my workshops with school board members, I tell them every school board member does one of two things in a district because they don't realize how important their role is. Every school board member either sucks the life out of the room, sucks the energy out of the room, or they breathe life into it. And depending on how they approach their role as an elected school board member has a critical impact, an enormous impact on the people in the organization. And they don't always realize how important that is.
So how do they bring the energy instead of sucking it out of the room and be a detriment to the energy?
By being positive, by being supportive, and by understanding their role in governance.
And how would you describe their role?
As setting the broad vision and the mission, hiring a superintendent, letting that superintendent do his or her job, and holding everyone accountable.
Let me ask a question not necessarily related to your book, but to what extent when you get mandates from outsiders, when the legislature says you have to teach something irrespective of what you know, we're going to say you have to teach X. To what extent is that having an impact on the culture within schools and the ability or inability to teach kids?
In schools, we do a whole lot of whining and crying. We've been crying about No Child Left Behind, and people have argued that it's narrowed the curriculum. It hasn't. It hasn't at all. And it's the same with other mandates. I mean, what are we going to do? Not teach reading? Not teach math? Common Core is coming in, and that's fine too. I mean, it's just the new standards, the new curriculum. We'll deal with that. We can address that. If a curriculum is getting narrowed because of so-called mandates, it's not the legislature, it's not No Child Left Behind narrowing the curriculum. It's decisions that school people are making to do that. In my case, we've expanded gifted art, we've expanded fitness and nutrition programs. at the same time because we've found those to be strategic tools for increasing student achievement.
It'd be interesting to talk even longer, but before we close out, if someone wants to get your book, where can they find it?
Amazon.com. It's Fuel, F-U-E-L, for learning.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.